I'm Jim Radford, and I'm, as far as anyone can discover, I'm Britain's youngest D-Day veteran. So I was a merchant seaman during the Second World War, in the last 2 years of the war. And I went to sea at 15 years old. I was at Aramash, building the Mulberry Harbour. So that was my induction to war. And I was in the Royal Navy after the war. I joined the Royal Navy to avoid going in the army, but during the war I was a merchant seaman. And although you weren't supposed to go, even in the merchant navy, you weren't supposed to go deep sea during the war under 16. For some strange reason, the tugs that I was on were exempt from that. So that's how I came to be the youngest.
So how old are you now?
I'm 90.
90 years old now.
I'm 90.
And where do you live now?
I live in London now, in Lewisham, and
Okay.
I come from Hull. All right. Well, I better tell you how I came to be anti-war, because, as I explained, I wasn't against the Second World War. I thought it was absolutely necessary to fight and defeat the Nazis. You know, otherwise all Europe would be enslaved, and possibly America too eventually. So I'm not ashamed of the war that I fought in, but during my service, in the Royal Navy, after the war, when the war was finished, I was in the Royal Navy, and I was a radar operator. And one of the jobs I had to do was to work on what they call stag mountings, which is radar-controlled guns. And I had to go and do some training on board the battleship Vanguard, which was swarming with botany and scientists. And I was supposed to learn how to work these things. But I was very impressed by the enormous amount of skill and technology and effort that had gone into planning these complicated weapons of mass destruction. And it dawned on me, you know, I taught I was 7 years in the Royal Navy, and it became very clear to me that if only a fraction of the effort and skill and money and time that went into planning and working out how to kill people at long distance, if only some of that effort and money and thought had gone into avoiding the need to kill people at long distance, it would surely succeed. War was unnecessary. It could be avoided. There are always going to be ways of avoiding it. All right, sometimes you've made mistakes, as we did after the First World War, led to the Second World War, and you have to defend yourself. I'm a great believer every person, every group, every nation has got the right to defend themselves from attack. But they don't have the right to put the young men in uniform and send them 2,000 miles overseas to kill people who've got no intention. The Iraqis had no intention of invading Britain or America. Never occurred to them. They didn't know the way here. So I became anti-war. But I wouldn't have necessarily have got involved. When I came out of the Navy in 1954, what angered me, I was very much opposed to nuclear weapons, of course. I thought that was an atrocity. And however you looked at it, that was an obscene atrocity to kill that many men, women, children, destroy everything, the history, the town, the future, everything gone. That was a terrible crime. So when I came out of the Navy, I didn't immediately start founding anti-war. I founded a humanist group, a humanist action group. And we discovered, somebody broke the news that American airplanes based in Britain had been flying through our skies since the war, carrying live nuclear weapons, ready to drop them on Russia if there was an attack. And we hadn't been told that. We didn't know that. It was a revelation. So I immediately started a campaign, local campaign, which became wider, to oppose that. And I got in touch with other people who were opposed to it. And there were some people who had already formed a group called the Direct Action Committee, and they were campaigning against the American bases where these nuclear weapons were stored and where the planes flew from. So we started going on to bases and sitting in cement mixers and getting dragged out by the ankles and all kinds of things. So that was how I became involved in the anti-war movement. And then by 1948, we a lot of us came together with different groups forming different places, and we decided that we needed a national organisation. So we contacted a lot of important people. Bertrand Russell was the most important, I suppose, and he was very much in sympathy with our aims. And we drew up the plans for, we drew up the plans first of all for a national demonstration, the Aldermaston March, the great march from Aldermaston where nuclear weapons are built, manufactured, to London. And that was a tremendous success, and we did it every year after that. And from that we decided to form a national organisation, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and that was formed in 1958, after the first march. But some of us were not happy with the constitution in terms of referendum. We thought it was too respectful. It was we wanted more direct action, so we were all members of CND. We all support CND. All the Biden went on the marches, but we formed a separate organisation called the Committee of 100, with Bertrand Russell as the president. And the Committee of 100's objective was to organise mass civil disobedience. We thought if we get enough people to break the law, they can't indefinitely lock us all up. We had an naive idea we'd fill the jails to overflowing and they'd have to do a deal with it. Well, we never did. We went to jail, lots of us, many times, some of us lots of times. I went to jail a few times. So that was the Committee 100. We organised some massive demonstrations, yeah.
So go up and lead up to Veterans for Peace that you co-founded with Ben, and how did that happen?
Yeah, well, there have been lots of offshoots of that. Before Veterans for Peace, we had the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign, the Vietnam Action Group, which I ran, which was a direct action group. In the early 80s, we founded a group of ex-services CND, all World War II ex-service men and women, and we were quite an influential organisation for some years, but they started dying off. I was the youngest, just about, so I'm still here, but most of them died off. And then Ben became disillusioned after his service in Iraq and got in touch with American Veterans for Peace. We, in ex-service CND, we also had lots of contacts with the Vietnam veterans in America, and some of them came over here and supported us. But that contact would fade away. Ben renewed the contract, set out to form a a British chapter of Veterans for Peace, and I think I was about one of the first people he contacted and to be a founder member, and I said, of course, yeah. So I've been involved ever since.
So tell me about...
And it's growing rapidly.
Tell me about Brian Wilson.
Well, I think it was
Brian. It was, there's no doubt. Cause he
was there.
So tell me that story that you met this American Brian Wilson.
What it was, it's 3 years ago, I think, when the Veterans for Peace Convention was in San Diego. We sent a party out, and I went out, and we stayed in LA for a week before we went to San Diego, and I did a lot of gigs there, a lot of singing. There's folkies to my amazement, there's some folkies in LA who'd heard of me. I didn't think that anybody heard of me in America. Anyway, so we had this crowded agenda, and one day we went to this big meeting downtown LA, and I thought I was going to be asked to sing, and when I got there, I was asked to talk. And I had a few drinks. We'd been drinking that day, so I wasn't drunk, but I was relaxed. And I hadn't prepared a speech for anything, so when I got up, I just talked off the top of my head, explained how I came to be anti-war, but then I sort of laid into the audience, told them how ashamed they should be of what America had done in Vietnam, and how horrified and disgusted I was, and half the world was, with you know, Americans becoming the Nazis in Vietnam, and so I laid on a bit strong. I told them, I said, you know, my government, we've got plenty to be ashamed of in Britain, of our colonial past. We've done lots of atrocities, but you've outdone us. Your atrocities in Vietnam were worse than anything we did. You know, we massacred people in various places, but not on that scale and not with that callousness. So I said, you ought to be totally ashamed of what you did and what your government did, and kick out all the people who were involved in it. And so after I'd done that, I went to sit down. This big guy came over to me, this big ex-US Marine, or I think it was Brian, and I thought he was going to take me to task, and that I'd probably been a bit rude to my host. So I put my hand on, I said, perhaps I came on a bit strong. And he towered over me, he said, no you didn't, he said, you were too restrained, he said. My country has become the fourth fucking Reich. I remember that and I quote him.
So, tell me about Brian Wilson. What did he look like?
Oh, this is a big guy, and the big guy with two artificial legs, which I'm told, I've discovered later he'd lost lying in front of an ammunition train somewhere in America, trying to stop an ammunition train from taking American explosives to kill civilians in Iraq or Afghanistan or somewhere. And the train hadn't stopped. They don't, no. I digress, right? I'll tell you, sir, I'm one of three brothers brought up in the back streets of Hull, or as Terence Rattigan once put it, the royal slums of Hull in the 20s. And we all went to sea. We were a seafaring family. My father had been to sea. All my mother's side were all fishermen. And my three brothers, we all went to sea straight from school. Now, before the war, in Hull, you left school at 14 years old, and if you went to sea, you go to sea as a galley boy or a deck boy, and work your way up, you know, deckhand, whatever. And so, my eldest brother Jack went to sea a couple of years before the war. My brother Fred, second brother, he went to sea in 1939, and I went to sea in 44. But when the war started, they brought in a rule you couldn't join the armed forces until you were 16, and then they wouldn't send you abroad. And you couldn't go to sea in the merchant navy, deep sea, until you were 16. But for some reason, the tugs were excluded from that. So when I left school, I went straight down to the shipping office and said, give me a ship, I want to go to sea. It'd be like my two brothers. And they said, how old are you? 50, just 50. Go away, come back when you're 16. I said, what do you mean? My brothers were, oh, well, it's different now, you can't go. But right next door to the shipping office was the office of United Towing Company. And for some reason, they had different rules. They were on the pool system, so they didn't care. They gave me a job straight away, deckhand on a harbour tug. Not deep sea, just in like small tugs you see on the tip. But I was only on that for a couple of weeks. Then they transferred me to a deep sea tug, a long-range salvage tug, and that was how I came. And you go to the shipping office and they said, they give you your identity card, and they say, do you want to volunteer for the Victory Fleet? I said, what's the Victory Fleet? They said, the Victory Fleet is, if and when they invade Europe, they might want to take you off the ship you're on and put you on another ship to go. And if you volunteer for it, you get £1 a week extra. So I said, put my name down. But of course I didn't know the ship I was on was already part of the Victory Fleet. That's what we were doing. And my first trip was a very famous convoy called the Corn Cob Convoy, which was a convoy. We went right round the British Isles from Newcastle, Shields, Metal, Oban, Scapa Flow, collecting a huge convoy of block ships. Block ships were old, rusty old merchantmen, 20,000 tonners, some of them, high in the water, in ballast, skeleton crews, obviously not designed to carry cargo anywhere, meant to be sunk. And we had to, in great secrecy, bring them right down to the south of England in terrible weather, worst storms they had for 50 years, ready for the invasion. And we arrived at Poole Harbour on June the 5th, June the 6th, D-Day, to France. By tea time we were scuttling them off the coast of France under fire. I was telling the story of my three brothers, right? So as a result of that, I became, as far as they can tell, the youngest D-Day veteran. If there was anybody there younger than me, they're not alive, they're dead now, because when they did the 70th anniversary thing, they tried to find veterans, and they couldn't find anyone younger than me. Now my eldest brother, Jack, he was the youngest merchant seaman officer to be killed in the Second World War. He was also the youngest ever radio officer in the British Merchant Navy. Because when the war started, he had been at sea a couple of years, but they desperately needed radio officers. At 17, as the youngest radio officer in the Merchant Navy, unfortunately his first trip he was torpedoed, and that was the end of Jack. And my second brother Fred, he was at sea and did several crossings of the Atlantic, but in 1941 he volunteered for the Naval Rescue Tug Service, doing the same job that I was doing on the tug. And because he was a cook, what they did, they had a special branch of the Navy, and they didn't train, they took men off merchant ships and put them in uniform on the tugs, flying the white ensign, under naval discipline, but they hadn't had naval training. They had merchant navy training. So Fred, when they put him in uniform on the tug, they said, right, what were you in the merchant navy? He said, I'm a cook. He said, oh, well, a cook on the tug would be a petty officer. So we make you a petty officer. So they made him a petty officer at 18. And in the Royal Navy, you can't become a petty officer at 18. It's not possible. But in the war, it was. So the three of us, each were the youngest to do something.
Did you all survive?
No, Jack was lost in 41. Fred survived and spent the rest of his life as a fisherman.
And was it Jack that didn't survive?
Jack didn't survive.
What do you know about? Was he was in the Merchant Marine?
He was the radio officer, yeah.
Did his ship get sunk? Was it U-boats or?
Yes, it was the SS Cree. It was an ore carrier. So when they hit, it would just go to the bottom. And in the area of 1941, they still used to put notices in the papers. So the first we knew about it was a notice in one of the papers saying an SOS received from the British ore carrier SS Cree that she'd been torpedoed such and such a latitude, about 150 miles south of Greenland. And she was a straggler from a convoy, so nobody went to look for it. Lost with all hands, 41 men. There's a Merchant Navy memorial at Tower Hill, and there's 40,000 names there of men, including many that I know, my brother, my cousin, uncle. I've got lots of relatives there. I go to Senate staff now with Veterans for Peace to sing anti-war songs, but I didn't, before we formed Veterans for Peace, I stopped going to the Senate. I used to go with the Normandy veterans, and I stopped going because and I did an interview and got widely reported. I said the ceremony's been hijacked by the royal family and the politicians and the church. I said, it's not about the church, it's not about the politicians, it should be about the men and the women who died and fought and died. So I stopped going, and I used to go to the Merchant Navy Memorial at Tower Hill, which is a nice little park with these plaques, 40,000 names of men lost at sea during the war, many of them. So quite a lot from my hometown, and quite a lot I knew. And I used to go there, but they too have a little religious ceremony. And I got into trouble one year because I had written a song, a tribute song, to the British merchant seaman called The Merchant Seaman, and I offered to sing it there, and I did, and they didn't accept that offer. I've done it since then. With this ceremony, they play. I don't know, there's a hymn called the Sailor's Hymn. You know it? There's a chorus. Oh, hear us when we cry to thee for those in peril on the sea. It's a hymn about God looking after sailors. And it made me very cross because, and I said to the padre afterward, I said, how can you do that? I said, you know, God had no presence in the North Atlantic, 39 to 45, he was noticeably absent. I said, 40,000 men drowned, died, or blown to pieces, or roasted in burning oil. And I'm quite sure a few of them cried to him, cried out, prayed. He wasn't there, he didn't listen, nobody was. So it made me cross that the church tries to get in on everything, you see. Anyway, I digress.
Can you sing a little bit of that song?
He's got a song chorus. There's a rainbow faintly gleaming through the grey skies of old England to welcome a homeward bounder on the day of his return. Neath the dockyard cranes a-looming, with a distant siren booming, as the dockyard matey scurry to take his heaving line. And there's a cold nor'easter squalling, and a drizzling rain a-falling, but there's naught can damp his spirits, now he's reached the shores of home. For he's been through hell and danger, to them he is no stranger. In the cruel North Atlantic, he's seen men and ships go down. But now there's wives and sweethearts waiting, and they'll soon be celebrating, for Jack is home from sea, and he has left the killing ground. But as he walks the streets of Liverpool, Cardiff, Hull and London town, he'll pass 1 million people there, and some of them may frown, because he doesn't wear a uniform that tells you what he's done. He's just the merchant seaman that we all depend upon. That's the first verse. That would have been Hammer's 48 or 49. Royal Navy, stationed in Malta. Malta is our Mediterranean base, and Grand Harbour's a magnificent harbour in Malta, beautiful harbour, and all the Mediterranean fleet anchored out in the harbour. And I've been ashore. There's a famous street in Malta called the Straight Street, the Gut. It's not there now, but it used to be old bars, and you go there and you try and work your way down and have a drink in every bar. You never succeed. So after a few hours, you're totally drunk. And that particular night, I hadn't got an all-night pass, so I had to be back on board the ship by midnight. And the last Liberty boat went at 11:30 or so, I forgot what time. So I rushed down to get to the jetty, Custom House steps, where we caught the Liberty boats. And I've just missed the last boat. And I was due back on board. So I wanted to get back on board. So you can see all the lights of the ships in the harbour. It's a big harbour. And I thought I could pick out my ship. I hadn't. I couldn't see it. It was hidden behind a cruiser or something. But I thought I could. And since I had a few drinks and I was a good swimmer, I thought I'd swim back. So I'd seen them do these American films where they take the clothes off and they tie them on top of the head. So I did that. Said as a silk scarf around it, a black silk scarf, memory of Nelson. So I tied my clothes in a bundle, put them on top of my head, tied them under my chin, slipped off to my underpants. Can't remember what I did with my shoes. They must have been round my neck too. And I set off to swim. And I thought I could see the ship. Once you get in the water, your vision's limited. You can't see. I could only see the first ship, and it's a big harbour. Must be a mile or so across. And I was swimming for a long time, and I'd swim to a ship and swim round the stern where I could see the name because it illuminated. Wrong ship. So I went to 4 or 5 ships. I couldn't find my ship. I was getting pretty exhausted, and I lost my bearings totally. I couldn't even swim back because I didn't know where I'd come from. I couldn't see the direction I'd come from or where I was going. I could just see the lights of the different ships and the entrance to the harbour. And I was pretty exhausted. I think I've been in the water, felt like an hour or so. I don't know how long, but a long time. And of course the clothes that I'd tried to keep dry, they were hanging underneath me after the first few minutes. That doesn't work, that tying your clothes on top of your head. So I was getting exhausted. Eventually the last ship I could see way back by Beagie Bay, and I swam over to it. And you have the gangplank there. I just managed to climb on board the gangplank. Quite difficult, about that high in the water, to pull yourself out of the water if you've been swimming for a long time. And sat there for 10 minutes to get my breath back, and then crept inboard and down below. And nobody believed me when I said I swum back.
So did you get caught?
No, I didn't know.
How'd they find out? You just told them?
Well, nobody found out. My messmates, I told them about it, yeah.
Oh.
But I didn't. Yeah. I would have been on a charge if I'd been not meant to. 2 months before that, I was a schoolboy at the whole College of Arts and Crafts, and I was going around the town with the Young Communist League, pasting up big Second Front Now posters. There was a campaign in Britain to assist our Russian allies by starting the Second Front. It had been going on and on, been talking about for years. Well, obviously it had been carefully planned since 1943, but we didn't know that. So there was a lot of decent people, every lefty in Britain was campaigning for the Second Front, saying, you know.
What are your thoughts on the Soviet Red Army and their involvement in World War II?
Well, when I go into school a lot, I used to, for the normally veterans, and now for Veterans of Peace, and they want to know about the war. So I tell them about the war, and I'm not really talking about the wars in general. I'm talking about the war at sea, and our part in it. And I explained to them that as far as Britain was concerned, and America, and the Allied cause generally, the most important battle of the war for us was the Battle of the Atlantic. Because if we'd lost the Battle of the Atlantic, there would have been no base for the Second Front. But I said the crucial battle of the war was Stalingrad, of course. The Russian, Stalingrad was the turning point, you know, the turning point of the war, the first great crushing defeat the Nazis had, and that turned the tide. And I said, you know, if I talk about America, I say, Americans don't know. Lots of Americans don't even know Russia was in the war. They think they're on the other side. And I said, do you know how many Russians lost their lives fighting the Nazis compared to Americans? Of course they don't know. I said, well, for every American that died, a few hundred Russians died. I said, the discrepancy was that great. You know, 25 million men, it's unbelievable. So, Russia saved, some Americans think they saved our bacon, and I say, no, Russia saved everybody's bacon. I think you apply the same philosophy to war that you should apply in your daily life. In your daily life, when I was a young man, I got in a lot of fights. I was always getting into fights. And the reason I got into fights is because like the Americans, the thing I was afraid of is that anybody should think I was afraid. The last, you know, I thought I was afraid. I didn't want to get hurt. So I thought, because I'm afraid, I'm a coward. I don't want anybody else to know I'm a coward. So when they look at me funny, I'm going to go and challenge them. So I used to, I start fight. I didn't think I'd start fight, but I did start fight. And once I realised that I wasn't a coward, that in emergency I could do whatever I had to do, you know, what was necessary, I stopped causing fight. And my philosophy has been to walk away from trouble if you can. If you can't, defend yourself. If you're attacked, I'll defend myself against anybody. Even if I don't think I could win, I'll defend myself. But I won't attack anybody. Now, if you apply that principle, if that applies to you as an individual, your son, you've got a son, you're bringing up a son, and he's going out. He's going to, I know, the age where he's going out drinking, and you say to him, don't get into fights. Somebody says, insults you or whatever, tell them to walk away. So don't get into fights unnecessarily. If you're attacked, defend yourself. If your friends attack, defend them. If you're someone who needs defending, defend other people, but do not be the attacker. Now, if you apply that, if it applies it applies to a country as well, to a group or a nation, you know, we have no need to attack people, and there's nothing to be gained by attacking people, unless you're a thief and want to take away from them what's theirs, which Britain's been a thief, America's a thief. You know, that's what they do. They steal from, they attack other people because they want their oil or their land or whatever. But if you don't want to steal from people, don't attack them. Don't get involved in fights that you can avoid.
How serious is the threat of war today, a global war or a nuclear war, in your opinion?
I'm not sure where I'd put it. I don't think the clock is at 10 to 12, but I think it's pretty close. I think the main danger now is of somebody starting a war accidentally. Some idiot, might be a president of a big country, or he might be someone lower down the line, not knowing what to do in the situation and doing the wrong thing. We owe our existence now to I forget the guy's name, was an American the intelligence officer who, had he obeyed his orders, his instructions, would have started the nuclear war. Because the signs were, or whatever it was, a flock of the signs were, there was definitely identified by American radar and the interpreters as an attack. You know, these were planes. They weren't planes, a flock of wild geese or some such thing, but they'd passed the point at which they had to identify. And his orders, had he gone by the book, which some people do, he would have set in chain the response, the armed response, the counter-attack. And he didn't do it. He had enough sense not to do it. Can't be right. And we have systems like that. They don't tell us. The commanders of the nuclear submarines, now they've got orders, they've got sealed orders. And we don't know what's in the sealed orders. And we don't know how frequent and how scrupulous the checks on their mental state are. All it needs is the commander of a nuclear submarine to have a breakdown, a brainstorm, whatever. You know, his wife could betray him, or his son could be killed in a freak accident. All kinds of things. People do have breakdowns. People do have mental illnesses. All it needs is for a commander of a nuclear submarine to have some kind of a mental breakdown and decide to press the wrong button, and we have a nuclear war. It's in that's the danger. I think that's the main danger. Accidental nuclear war. There's increased. The interesting thing was in 1958, when we started Lord C&D, we put forward our arguments, and the press examined them, and we got all the right-wing press dismissing them. And the arguments we put forward were very simple. We said, why do we need nuclear weapons? You tell us we need nuclear weapons to deter people from attacking us. Well, if that's right, who do you think might attack us? The people who've got nuclear weapons already, the Russians. They've had it, or the Americans if they turn against them, but the Russians have got them, and they don't like our system, so they might attack us. So we have to have nuclear weapons to deter them. Now there are people who don't like us, apart from the Russians, in the Middle East and elsewhere. So they would think, we suggested, they will think the only way we can stop Britain from attacking us, ever, is to get nuclear weapons. So they want nuclear weapons. And then they go on and on, every tin pot. You know, you might think the British and American and Russian governments got responsible people, but there are other governments around the world that generally recognise not to have responsible people. They'll want nuclear, and they'll get them in due course. And that was dismissed. That's exactly what has happened, isn't it? Exactly what has happened. Proliferation. India, Pakistan, the nuclear standoff. Well, Pakistan's they're both unstable in my view. But the Hindu government and Muslim, they're both unstable. North Korea, Israel, for Christ's sake. Israel, which is, I'm now classed as an anti-Semite because I take the view that Israel is an apartheid state, that they're doing the most ridiculous iron. They're currently celebrating, Israel and Jewish people, the feast of the Passover. And they just don't see the iron. What do you celebrate? We're celebrating our escape from slavery under the Egyptians. 100 years of slavery. They can't see the ludicrous of this. They're doing it to the Palestinians exactly what they say the Egyptians did to them, only more so. I don't think the Egyptians built settlements all over the Jewish land and built walls around them. And sorry,
No,
I get very angry about it.
that's very good.
So I'm anti-Zionist. And all my Jewish, I've lots of Jewish friends. The backbone of the British Labour movement and the British Communist Party was the East End Jews. And I'm in a group called Green Socialist Alliance. It consists of Greens who don't think the Green Party is left enough, and Socialists who don't think the Socialist parties are green enough. So we're Green Socialist Alliance. And the backbone of that is the old ex-communist Jews who used to be in the Communist Party. I remember I certainly wanted to defeat the Nazis, not the Germans. I've got Germans in my family. I had a German great-grandmother. Nothing against the German people, but the Nazis, I hate the Nazis. And I certainly wanted to defeat the Nazis. And I enjoyed being at sea. I mean, I didn't want to be at sea being torpedoed and bombed. But I enjoyed the life at sea. So my plan was to spend my life. I hadn't any plans to do anything except go to sea. Even in the Royal Navy, I enjoyed being at sea. I didn't like the discipline in the Royal Navy, and I didn't like the militarism. And that, as I say, I turned against it. I gave up militarism. I never was particularly militarist, and I gave up religion when I was in the Royal Navy. But I intended, when I finished my time, to go back to Hull, where I came from, and either go back fishing and get a ticket, a trawler skipper's ticket, celebrate my family, or go back deep sea like my father had been around the world. And that was my plan. But I had to change my plan because my last year in the Navy, I met this incredibly beautiful wren. My wife Jenny was in the Wrens, Women's Royal Naval Service, and that changed my plans. I wasn't going to go to sea and leave her ashore. So I changed my plan and stayed ashore. It did interesting. I've had a very interesting life ashore, done lots of interesting things. I came from a working class town, so most of the people in my youth that I met up until I was a young man were lefties. If they weren't, it might not have been communists, some were in the Labour Party, and there were various other groups. But there was tremendous support for the Soviet Union in Hull, and my friends and I were all supporters of the Young Communist League, and we were very actively involved. There was a campaign in Britain, in working class areas, campaigning for a second front. So everywhere you go, you see on the walls, second front now. So a lot of pressure on the government. And I was doing that, I was painting those slogans but a few weeks before I went to sea to take part on the second front.
And there was also the campaign Aid to Russia Fund, Red Cross.
Yeah. Well, in the Royal Navy and the Merchant Navy, there were some very dangerous runs. Nobody was dangerous. North Atlantic convoys were dangerous. I lost one brother there. My other brother was on it. But the most dangerous job of all for a merchant steamer or Royal Naval steamer during the war was the Arctic convoys. Convoys that taking aid to Russia. The chaps, we got one chap in Veterans of Peace who was, where's the White Beret? White Beret ship means you're on the Arctic convoys. Now we used to have a saying in the Royal Navy, what do you call the chap who wears a white beret? He was on the Arctic convoy. What do you call him? So what do you mean? Sir is the answer. Sir. You show him respect. That was the most dangerous job. And the tugs, I forget the name of the tug. There was a tug. We all know each other on the tugs, the rescue tugs. A lot of them came from Hull, the ones we built. And there was a tug skipper, whose name I just can't recall, and he was on the Arctic. There was one Arctic convoy in particular, there were several, one Arctic convoy that was totally decimated. It was bombed night and day, and most of the ships sunk. And the reason for that was that when it set off, it had an escort, it had battleships, cruisers, and might even have an escort. But they were called away because they thought the news came out that Bismarck had left its port. So the Royal Navy, this main escort, was diverted to go and sink the Bismarck. So this convoy, Russian convoy, went on its way past Iceland with hardly any escort. Might have had a couple of corvettes, no proper escort. So it was bombed remorselessly by planes from Germany, from Norway, and submarine attacks. And they sunk most of the ship. And a lot of the ship was saved because the tug skipper, I don't know if you, when you go past Iceland, you go up here, and at a certain point you have to turn right to go towards Archangel, towards the Russian ports. And this tug skipper, they were being bombed, but they had a bit of respite at night. The planes would go back, and then the next morning they'd be back again. So he was responsible for 4 or 5 ships. So he signalled the ships together, and he signalled the ship. He said, this is what you do. He said, get every white sheet you can and drape everything with white. Paint everything white. Get white paint out, paint everything white. Camouflage the whole ship. Do it now, work all night to do it. And then, so they did that, and the next day, when they were meant to be, instead of sticking to the course, he went straight on, up north into the Arctic ice pack. So they were amongst all these ice floes, and everything was painted white, so the German planes couldn't find them. So he rescued 5 or 6 ships of this convoy, most of them were destroyed, and he took them up on a wider circle and then came back down to Archangel. I did a talk last week, I go to the maritime festivals, and one of the things they asked me to do is following up on Mayday tugs of war, I tell the rescue tug story, because most people in Britain and America know nothing about the wartime rescue tug. So I tell them the story, and I was a founder member of the Deep Sea Rescue Tug Association and the press officer, so I always had the job of doing the talking. So when I started going to schools, I thought kids don't want to listen to a boring lecture for an hour. So I condensed my lecture and put it into a song. So it's not a brilliant song, but it's a very educational song. Do you want an educational song?
Yeah.
All right. It goes like this. Now there are military historians who churn out books and tracts, who study wartime records, think they know all the facts, but there's still an untold story of the war upon the sea, because most of them have never heard of T124T. It was back in 1940 that the urgent order came. Crash build a fleet of rescue tugs to bring the convoys home. For Hitler's deadly U-boats were Churchill's greatest fear. He knew if we could not defeat them, the end would soon draw near. And so a special naval service was created at great speed and secretly deployed to meet the desperate need. Campbelltown in Scotland and Harwich in the east became the wartime bases for T124T. And the Buster and the Growler jaunty and tenacity. Rescue tugs just like them patrolled on every sea. They brought back crippled freighters and warships by the score. And they made a crucial difference to the outcome of the war. Now the tug crews were recruited from men who knew the sea, from the fishing fleets of Britain and the mercantile marine, sent to sea in naval uniform to do a dangerous job. And that's why the Pusser Navy called us the Tatty Mob. But the Tatty Mob were seamen who knew the wind and waves. They rescued many thousands from death and watery graves. Many a sailor, many a soldier owed his life to such as these. And they're the reason why the U-boats never brought us to our knees. And many a tugman had to leap aboard a sinking, burning ship to secure the tow in heavy seas while black ice numbed his grip. The ships were towed 1,000 miles in storms and deadly gales, with the axeman standing by in case she slipped beneath the whales. Yes, the Buster and the Growler jaunty and tenacity, and many more just like them saved lives on every sea. It's a shame they're not remembered, never asked to take a bow, because without the tatty lads, you'd all be speaking German now. So I was an active member of the Labour Party when I came out of the Navy, and I campaigned within the Labour Party for unilateral nuclear disarmament. And they said, so in 1960, we put a resolution to the Labour Party conference that the policy of the Labour Party should be unilateral nuclear disarmament. Set an example, get rid of them. And we lost. And they said, so we were disappointed, but they said to us, at the conference, they said, oh, it's a Democratic Party, you have to go by the majority view. So we said, all right. So we do so. So we spent a year, we campaigned. We sent people, I spoke at meetings all over the country, went Manchester, Sheffield, different places. We organised meetings through Trades Council and Labour Party, all kinds of groups. And we put the case for you, and we won. We got massive support. So next year we go back to the Labour Party conference, annual conference that's meant to decide the policy of the Labour Party. We put the same resolution, and it was passed overwhelming majority for unilateral nuclear disarmament. And the leader of the Labour Party, the parliamentary leader, Hugh Gaitskell, said, he made a famous speech. He said, we will fight, fight, fight again to save the party we love from these agitators, these Reds under the beds. We were all branded as Reds under the beds because we were in favour of peace. So that's when we realised that the Labour Party was not a democratic organisation. So I left, and I organised a rally in Trafalgar Square, down there, Committee on, and I got hundreds of people in the Labour Party to publicly burn the Labour Party cards. And they said, oh, you're going into the political wilderness, you never achieve anything outside the party. I achieved far more in a few years outside the party than I ever did inside it. I led national campaigns about housing action and homelessness, and got all kinds of things done that could never be done in the Labour Party because the leadership would have stymied it. Now, I'll tell you an amusing aside on that story. Some years later, I was invited to a party in North London by a friend of mine who was still a Sikh, who was still active in the Labour Party. And I didn't know many people, and I was dancing with this fairly attractive young woman. And she said to me, oh, I've heard about you. She said, you're Jim Radford, yeah. He said, are you not in the Labour Party? I said, no, I left. Why? I said, well, that bastard Hugh Gateson drove me out. Oh, she said, and I told her the story. I said, you know, bloody Hugh Gateson, you know, I didn't call him a fascist, I said, but, you know, he slagged us off, drove us out, and, you know, I blame him for our being out of the Labour Party. And she said, oh, very interesting. So, and I went, a bit later on the same evening, I was at my mate there. I said, who was that girl I was dancing with? He said, oh, that's, I forget what her first name. That was Gatesco's daughter. I'd been dancing with his daughter and slagging him off to her. I didn't know, yeah. There you go. It's a small world.
In the cold grey light of the 6th of June, in the year of 44, the Empire lads sailed out from Poole to join with thousands more. The largest fleet the world had seen, we sailed in close array, and we set our course for Normandy at the dawning of the day. There was not one man in all our crew but knew what lay in store, for we had waited for that day through 5 long years of war. We knew that many would not return, but all our hearts were true, for we were bound for Normandy, where we had a job to do. As the years passed by, I can still recall the men I saw that day, who died upon that blood-soaked sand, where now sweet children play. And those of you who were on board, who've lived in liberty, remember those who made it so on the shores of Normandy.